for the GI
Don't
tract?
underestimate the power of your GI tract. It can digest anything, all right? And it will chop it up. There's basically 3 ingredients. You got fat, you got protein, you got carbohydrates. And your body takes them, slices, dices it, reduces it to a molecular level, and absorbs it into the small intestine. And that's what it does, and it's very good about doing that. It just takes longer for fat to be absorbed. And generally what happens, and this is why you need so many neurons within the GI tract, when you take a large meal, your stomach recognizes that there's a lot of fat in there, and then it slows its emptying. It slows its emptying so the small intestine can maximally absorb all the fat from the food. So it slowly releases the food so the small intestine can maximally absorb that nutrition. So you'll get like 99% absorption of the nutrients from fat, regardless of the type of fat. And whether it's good fat or bad fat, fish oil or animal fat, whatever, it doesn't matter. So.
Follow-up question, is there a type of diet, like for example, a Mediterranean diet that's better for people with Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, it's very hard to say about that particular point. It's been hard to really do specific dietary things because many people are losing weight. You just want them to be able to maintain their weight, and they're having trouble swallowing. It's hard enough when someone's having trouble swallowing and trying to maintain their weight to put more and more restrictions on the foods that they can eat when you're just trying to actually maintain their weight and maintain their overall strength. So but your particular question is there a particular dietary intervention that can be beneficial in the Parkinson's? That's not really been studied. So, yes, sir.
What medications, such as Linzess, in your experience, does that help people?
Well, Linzess is an effective medication for constipation, and it's very effective for that purpose. And you know, if a smaller dose doesn't work, you can use a larger dose. But some people just don't respond to it. And individuals with Parkinson's who have constipation, as I said, they can be very, very stubborn in the sense they don't respond to just one medication. Sometimes you have to use more than one to achieve the effect you want. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Many of us are with constipation are taking a mix of over-the-counter laxatives, like you mentioned, and much higher doses than the bottle recommends.
Yes, you're right.
And we're going to do it long term.
Right.
Is there a danger in that? Or
Well, actually, and this brings up an issue. In the early constipation has been a part of American history for the last 200 years. And I want to tell you about a little quick story. We got time for this. There was a Presbyterian minister named Sylvester Graham in the 1850s, and he believed heartily that constipation was the basis for growing promiscuity in the American population. So he was certain this led to promiscuity and a reduction of values. So he was advocating these different sorts of fiber in the diet, and he came up with the graham cracker. And so along the way, it was tasteless until one of his associates added a little salt to it, added a little sugar in it, and then the sales took off. But among his 2 principal disciples, and this was like a fanatic group, and he was not welcome in cities that had butchers. He was run out of Boston. There was a riot of butchers chasing him with a meat cleaver. And so, and his lectures were quite the thing. When you start talking about promiscuity, sexual promiscuity, people were fainting right and left at the time. So he was a really dynamic speaker. But he had two disciples, John Kellogg and a guy named Post. And they went on to develop breakfast cereals in Battle Creek. They came bitter enemies. John Kellogg, he went on to he developed, his first product was cornflakes. Terrible seller until his brother convinced him to add some sugar to it, and then sales took off. And then Post, he had this particular product called Manna from Heaven. Sales were terrible. His marketing director said, we got to change the name. And they changed it to Post Toasties, and sales took off. So and time went on, and right around the same time, it was discovered the Civil War and the invention of the hypodermic needle. And people were starting to use those needles for injection of morphine, and had a lot of morphine addicts after the Civil War. But it came to be used in certain experiments, and they discovered that they took the stool from mice, liquefied it, put it in a hypodermic syringe, injected a mouse in its belly, the mouse would keel over dead. And so they thought there's got to be toxins within the stool that are leading to this issue in terms, and hence it was as postulated there was toxins in the stool that had to be evacuated on a daily basis. So medicine in the early 1900s in America, where doctors were teaching American mothers that their children had to have a bowel movement every day no matter what, because otherwise these toxins would build up and their children would not grow up to be properly. So many children were abused with various types of laxatives, and cod liver oil is a favorite. Enemas were always popular and so forth. So the 1920s and 30s, all of these children were raised under this regimen of a daily bowel movement no matter what. And it all sort of began in the early, in the mid 1800s. And then, more recently, it almost died out. Then Princess Diana advocated the use of coffee ground enemas as a way of treating constipation. And then it took off again in the 1980s in terms of fascination with constipation and various remedies for it. So right now, it's we're trying to bring, the reason I do these lectures is, holy cow, you see these people making up medical science on TV right in front of you, and it has no relationship to any science at all. And so 10 years ago I decided I got to get out there and educate people on what the truth is, and it's just and it's a lot more interesting than what people are describing. But yes, ma'am.
So the alpha-synuclein then, for those that already have Parkinson's, are you doing any of that in your office where you can test the stool or do some sort of biopsies in to see what the levels are?
Those are all research studies in terms of, these are all research studies in terms of being able to go in and do biopsies like that. There's no commercially available, it's not an accepted technique in terms of everyday clinical practice. So I'm just saying it's suggested as a means of being able to screen for people, but there are some technical things. Because these neurons are not just laying around on the surface, just like you don't have neurons on your skin. They're buried deep inside the GI tract because that's where they're embedded in terms of the muscles. So it'd be an effort to be able to do a biopsy of these things. But the notion would be it's feasible to do it. There's techniques to do it. And if you have proper stains, you can find it and you can do something about it. But it just, right now, it's just being suggested as a possible method. Yes, sir.
Do you do fecal transplants for anything other than C. diff infection? And if you do, is there just a one-shot procedure?
Say again the question.
So the question is, do you do fecal transplants for anything other than C. diff infection?
Right now, in 2013, the FDA ruled that stool was a drug. They were going to regulate it as a drug. And in order to do intensive studies on that, now you'd have to do an investigational new drug application to investigate using stool in a therapeutic sense. So it's $100 million to do those kind of studies. Now, the notion here, and the reason they made that was there was growing studies in 2011, 12, and 13 showing that there were specific abnormalities in the microbiome unique to individuals with inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, coronary heart disease, autism, Parkinson's disease, and it was concerned that, hey, if there's a causal relationship there, if people are giving stool transplants willy-nilly, then you may potentially transplant the ability to give, to develop coronary artery disease or Parkinson's disease. Now, in 2013, there was a great pushback from the gastrointestinal community because there's about 30,000 people, the Americans, dying each year because of C. diff. And the only treatment we have for recurrent C. diff that's effective is a stool transplantation. It's about 95% effective. So I developed the stool transplant program at Naples Community Hospital in 2013. We transplanted about 65 people now for recurrent C. diff. But that's the only indication the FDA has allowed, and in that context, you have to tell the individual it's an experimental procedure and that there's that this is not conventional therapy, and sign consent and have a research program to follow these individuals. So that's but in terms of other areas that's being looked at, the next studies are looking at transplantation for people with liver disease and transplantation, as I said, potentially for Parkinson's. They just develop those clinical trials.
And how is that done? Is it done with capsules or enema? How do you actually do the fecal transfer?
Well, that's another great story.
Love story.
These stories just do not end.
I mean, it sounds so literal, but I'm sure it's not as literal as it sounds.
Well,
What are you doing?
well, a
exactly?
stool transplant, the reason the FDA intervened in 2011, the New York Times, the front page, had this article about this man who gave himself an enema, a stool transplant from his girlfriend. And he did it in the front bedroom of his house, giving himself an enema from the rear end. And he was cured of his inflammatory bowel disease. And people started, there was a YouTube site that popped up, The Power of Poop, that gave you a YouTube video on how to give yourself a stool transplant. And then, so these things were beginning to proliferate, and the FDA was concerned, holy cow, you can have all these Americans running around giving themselves stool transplants. And then in 2013, there was a case report of an individual, a young woman who had a C. diff, who got a transplant from her uncle, because she thought, after all, my Uncle Johnny is a good guy. But her Uncle Johnny turned out to be a heavy guy. She is a slender woman. She gained, the C. diff was cured, but she gained 50 pounds in the next year. And so her metabolism was profoundly changed by the change in her microbiome, and allowed her to be terribly efficient as far as being able to take in calories, and it changed her metabolism. So those kind of things indicated that, hey, maybe a lot more is going on with the GI tract in terms of the microbiome than just a sort of something that needs to be flushed down the toilet. So it just at any rate, there's a lot of trials right now. There's more than 180 trials looking at different kinds of transplants for different conditions. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if there have been some studies about family incidents of Parkinson's.
Yeah, again, there have been instances within families. There's been familial clustering, but Dr. Campbell's more of an expert on that kind. I'm not an expert on Parkinson's. I'm just a tummy doctor, you see. I'm not a... Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question. With all these fecal transplants, can't you introduce E. coli to the system? How can you avoid that?
E. coli is one of the principal components of your the bacterial population in your colon. It's supposed to be there. And you need to think of your microbiome as not something bad, but it's like a little ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that exists to protect you, and it does protect you from other pathogens. It provides additional nutrients, provides you additional vitamins. It's responsible for about 15% of your calories each day. Material that your small intestine cannot absorb, the material that's left over that's delivered to the colon is fermented further, and that breakdown of that fermentation process is able to extract more calories from that food.
They say sometimes some salads are contaminated with E. coli. You're not supposed to eat them. So
Well, wait a second. Now, you're talking about E. coli from a goat or a cow that has a particular sort of a virulent pathogenic nature and has a capability of causing infection. There's many other types of E. coli, and they call them serotypes, that are very beneficial to you. And so so you can have good germs and you can have bad germs and so forth. Principally, those that you're talking about, are associated with traveler's diarrhea and there you go. But the notion is that they're generally the bacterial population within your colon microbiome. You got to view it as an ecosystem that's beneficial to you.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
What serious complications can occur when one has to strain to make a bowel movement?
Okay. Well, that's always a great question here. I get that all the time. Now, when you're straining, what's occurring there is you're trying to evacuate the contents of your rectum, and what's often happening is you're building up a lot of pressure in your abdomen. You're flexing your belly muscles. You're flexing your diaphragm. The result is you're trying to compress the volume of your abdomen. And in a particular point, if there's material within the rectal vault, you can evacuate that. But what a lot of people sort of believe is they can force themselves to have a bowel movement by just straining hard enough, and no, you can't. Your colon's 5 feet long, and in order for things to move downstream to get to the rectum so you get the sensation of evacuation, you need to have peristalsis that moves things downstream. You can't on demand just strain and evacuate the rectum because there may not be anything there. In your men, their colon's about 4 feet long, women's about 5 feet long. Women's colon's consistently longer than men. And it wraps around your entire abdomen. The principal contents are not stored in the rectum. It's higher up within the abdomen, and as a result, none of that abdominal pressure will make any difference in terms of evacuation. But what will happen is when you strain like that, you raise your blood pressure, you raise the pressure in your brain, and you can potentially, as you're straining, you diminish the return to your heart, and you can start getting dizzy and pass out. So we don't really like people to go ahead and to do that. Now you might say, well, that 2-year-old did it, and they're successful. A 2-year-old can do a lot and strain a whole lot and tolerate a whole lot without passing out. But adults, you can't really tolerate that degree of activity without provoking a problem. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any harm in using glycerin suppositories for a situation like he's asking
Well,
about?
glycerin, it's nothing wrong with that. A lot of these agents, like you were referring to before, they have been available for years and years. You got Senecots, have been available for years when you use, or senna, derived from the vegetable plant senna, and you can develop a little bit of tolerance, so you have to use more of it to achieve an effect. Senna, by the way, is incorporated into many different herbal teas and so forth, and so you may not even know you're taking it. And then you have Dulcolax, glycerin suppositories. And the point I was getting to when you asked that question, I was telling you that story about Sylvester Graham, is that in the early 1900s, there was a variety of laxatives that came on the market. Some of them were contaminated with products that could actually injure the colon. And so there was a growing concern in the 1940s and 50s about bowel injury as a result of excessive use of laxatives and so forth. As a result of refinements in manufacturing, that's not been an issue in the last 50 years, but there's been this lingering concern in the medical profession that if you use too much laxatives, you're going to get damage to your colon. And that's not really sort of a concern. You can get a tolerance to the Senecot, but you won't damage your colon as a result. So you instead of 1 or 2 tablets, you might need 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 to achieve the effect. So, yes, ma'am.
This is really helpful, and let me ask you this. If you were going to, what would you prescribe or call for in testing if you just wanted to explore, even though you can't do anything about it, what is the flora or fauna of your bacteria you've got? What would you, as a gastroenterologist?
Well, there's a number of studies that are being done. Now, if you want to learn more about this, I'm giving a lecture on this specific topic at the United Church of Christ on March 14th at 10 a.m. And we'll talk about the microbiome, probiotics, and how the microbiome influences your immune system and so forth. So that would be a more detailed study. This was just meant on a very, very specific topic. But to get to your point, it's way beyond culturing the bacteria in your colon. Now it's using this advanced molecular biology techniques where you're checking specific DNA that are unique to different species. Because what we found, you cannot culture all the bacteria within your GI tract. You can only culture about 10 or 15% of the known species. But with using these new techniques, we're able to determine all the different varieties that are present. And it's just vast amount of data, and it's now many people, physicians are starting to do some of these tests and test for these different bacterial populations. But the truth is there's not an understanding what they mean. And so just enumerating these things there's no understanding by just enumerating these different bacteria, because we don't even know what's in the normal population of a normal individual. So it's very hard to say that if you could snap your fingers and do that with you, since we don't know what's normal, we don't really have anything with which to compare.
So we're sitting on this side of the bigger time.
I'm just telling you there's a lot of research being done on a whole other area, And a lot of people sort of race ahead, and it's an exciting area. But and fortunately now we have all the techniques so rapidly we can get a lot of information on these things. But it's a matter of directing your efforts in terms of the research and not leaping to do individual therapy based when there's not enough research to really justify it. Yes, ma'am.
I just have another question. If one takes a lot of laxatives, couldn't it affect their electrolyte balance in their
Well,
blood?
sure you can. You can do a lot of bad things to yourself if you take enough medications. And so they, and for example, Miralax, basically it's a powder that you add to water. Well, if you take more than 3 or 4 doses a day, you're taking a lot of extra water in, and it could be a problem. Some of these other medications that are used in excess can potentially cause you to lose enough potassium or magnesium that could be an issue. So yeah, you have to be thoughtful about that, but most, I'm just assuming you're trying to get an evacuation or response, then you're not trying to be sort of overboard about this. So, yes, ma'am.
I was on a cruise earlier this year, and we went to an aloe farm, and they had lots of different kinds of face cream and so forth made of aloe. And during the presentation, she had taken some of the aloe and had stripped off and had drained some of it out. And then she suggested that small pieces helped with constipation.
So that drippy white stuff?
No, after that drippy white stuff was out, what was left, the flesh that was left, small pieces were left.
And you're supposed to do well with that. Eat it?
She passed it around, and the people that I knew had good effect.
Okay. Well, the
Again.
trouble is with that is that, medicine, is based on, traditionally over thousands of years, you take observations that are valid like that there's some that's some beneficial effect of a herb or plant and so forth. And you say, gosh, this looks like it's beneficial. Oh, the bark from this willow tree is beneficial, and we'll make a little tea out of this, and it'll help you. And eventually, then they were able to extract acetylsalicylic acid or aspirin from the willow bark. But so the notion is to refine what you're doing, not just grind up something and throw it in there and take it. It's just try to be more precise in terms of the medication you're trying and its effect it's yielding and the dose it's effective, so you can be more scientific in terms of utilizing this. So we're a little bit beyond the just slathering stuff on or just stuffing the stuff down. It just is trying to be a little more precise about this.
Right, thank you.
But it's not denying the roots of
No.
herbal medicines for all of pharmacology. But it just I'm trying to say we're trying to be a little bit more scientific. Well, it has effect. Let's identify the effect. Let's identify the agent so we can be more precise. Yes,
We
ma'am.
have a member who swears that sauerkraut is the answer to constipation. Any possibility?
Well,
that
sauerkraut
could be?
is a form of probiotic, like kimchi, like yogurt, and like almost any of these fermented vegetables that have been available over the years. And it can have a beneficial effect because there is an organism that's present that can favorably influence the bacterial population in the GI tract. But you got to have a particular symptom. What's the role for probiotic? If you're feeling good and you're not having any gastrointestinal symptoms, you can't make your colon any healthier than good. And so the notion here, the probiotic manufacturers have no interest in demonstrating their particular product is effective. They're only interested in selling their product. And so as a result, they'll make a lot of claims, but they can never make a specific health claim, because if they do, then they come under the purview of the Food and Drug Administration. Until they make that claim, Congress has mandated that they don't have to have any demonstrated efficacy or effectiveness. They don't even have to be pure in terms of the product they're producing. It's not even clear they don't have to kill their patients. But they, so the notion here is that the probiotics by themselves, for a person who doesn't have a particular symptom, is there's no real role. And so that's one of the other things we'll be talking about in that lecture.
Liquid magnesium citrate or magnesium for constipation. What can you take too much magnesium? Everybody's trying to come up with their own combination of what gets them going for the bathroom and.
Of course, you're talking about Phillips milk and magnesia.
No, the one that we.
That's the active ingredient in
Yeah.
Phillips milk and magnesia is magnesium.
Yes.
So that's
So-
not a part of my family, but I just think, nonetheless, is that the magnesium has a laxative effect when you take enough of it. The trouble is that many people take magnesium as an electrolyte replacement. And there's a threshold when you get above a certain amount, when you get above 800 milligrams of the magnesium, that you will get diarrhea from it. Generally, it's a safe thing to use as a laxative, but if you get too much magnesium in your bloodstream, that can have an adverse effect too.
Right, so like over 800 milligrams is too much. say
Over
daily,
800
say
milligrams
daily.
will have an effect, so you get diarrhea. What I'm saying is when you use it on a steady, regular, high-dose basis, you can absorb enough magnesium that can be a problem. Now, most people's kidneys are good enough they can get rid of the extra magnesium. It's just occasionally you encounter a person that doesn't have real effective kidney function and they can't get rid of the excess magnesium. Then it can cause troubles.
Is it safe to use that with, say, Miralax, or would you be better off using?
Yeah, and that's what I was
Miralax?
just saying. Oftentimes you have to use a combination of a couple of different things together. Now, the Miralax and magnesium, they have similar methods of action, so generally you probably wouldn't use that combination together, but you can. I mean, I'm not going to argue with success.
But you
if that
use
works.
Miralax and Seneca. So
You're going to go through every combination. So, yeah, you can do that. Yes, you can do that too. Yes. Yes.
I'm under the impression that you do not favor taking probiotics.
Well, if there's a specific reason. If, for example, a doctor gives you an antibiotic for an unrelated reason, for example, like sinus infection or pneumonia or something, it's a good idea to take a probiotic there. But then it's a limited, and the idea is to protect your microbiome, and then you continue the probiotic for 30 or 60 days after the conclusion of the antibiotic, and then you can stop it. If you get traveler's diarrhea, it's probably a good idea to use it. If you have a particular symptom like diarrhea or bloating or constipation, you might try a probiotic. But, you know, it's hard to predict whether it'll help you, and if it hasn't helped you in a week or two, I would not necessarily continue that probiotic. The idea is continuing to use it if you haven't achieved an effect is not necessarily going to be beneficial to you. And they're not giving it away. These things are like $40, $50 for a month's supply. And so the notion is that there's no research on probiotics that's widespread that really shows that, hey, this probiotic is effective for this symptom and this circumstance. So it's very, very hit or miss whether a particular probiotic will help a particular symptom.
So since I'm a healthy woman, I can put the bottle away. I don't have to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you eat your fruit and vegetables like your mother told you to do, take more fluids, be active, physically active. Then if you have a particular issue that comes up, then there might be a role for it. But on an ongoing day in, day out basis, there's no role for using a probiotic if you're not having any GI symptoms.
you're welcome.
You guys have